welcome to our panel discussion on the future of learning, reimagining education and its impact on society. So looking forward to this, and have really just a wonderful panel here, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. So we're going to get this going in just a second. So thanks to all of you for being here. We are here at the panel discussion. And so we have three panelists who I'm really excited to have. We have Sharon Balin from Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. We have Antonella Poche, who many of you remember from her other roles in this conference this year and her being a keynote last year. And she's a co-chair of our executive committee and chair of many sessions. And Lisa Sanchez, our opening keynote speaker from this year, from Monday from the Department of Defense, and all people who have a lot to say and a lot of experience, and we're really looking forward to this conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the panelists, sort of one by one, to go ahead and introduce yourselves. Just give kind of a 30, 60-second introduction, and then we'll get into the questions. And for the audience, as we get into the questions, if you want to just go ahead and jump in, please do go ahead and do so, and put a question in the Q&A, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. So the idea is to make this interactive. We've got an hour together, and a lot of interesting things to talk about. So yeah, if we can kind of walk through and do brief introductions, maybe Sharon, if you want to start with you.
Certainly. Okay. Thank you, David. I'm delighted to be here, if only virtually, but that's fine too. I'm a professor emeritus from the Faculty of Education at Simon Fraser University, and my work is really focused largely on critical thinking and inquiry, critical thinking as inquiry, written a lot about what critical thinking is and about how one could infuse it, including a textbook called Reason and the Balance, a critical thinking textbook. And I also work with educators in higher education, but also K-12, to help them to infuse critical thinking and inquiry into their curriculum and pedagogy.
Okay, Antonella.
Hello, everyone. Yes, David already introduced me. I am full professor of experimental pedagogy at the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia, where I chair a Center for Research in Heritage Education, critical thinking, and the use of technology in teaching and learning. So I've been studying critical thinking in particular, and the possibility to assess and evaluate critical thinking levels in particular in higher education students, trying to support the possibility to enhance their abilities, and so their successful placement in the labor market.
Great. Okay, Alicia.
So, hi, I'm Alicia Sanchez. I am in Virginia, quite close to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. I am with the Department of Defense, specifically the Defense Acquisition University, where I am the Director of Innovation for our experimentation cell, which is affectionately titled DAUX, very novel. And within that, I explore some technologies, but mostly how the science of learning relates to the way we position content for the acquisition and sustainment workforce of the Department of Defense for adult learnings, almost in a corporate learning context. So I'm really excited to be here and to hear all of these great thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, well, it's great to have you here. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the slides, where it's going to be all conversation from here on. And so we're going to go ahead and do it that way, and we can talk as we go. So again, please, if you're in the audience and you've got questions and comments in the Q&A or anything in the chat, we will keep an eye on that. But I want to start with the first question. We've got people from both higher education and workplace learning, as we just heard. So what are the key weaknesses or gaps that you see in education, either higher education or workplace learning, or both, today? So let's kind of start from the problems that we're trying to solve. What are some of the key weaknesses or gaps that you see that we might want to address? And we can
I
start
can
with
kick
whoever
that
wants to
off if you'd
start.
like, David.
Please, absolutely.
So for me, I think that when we saw David Kelly's keynote, and certainly with Captain Cannons today, I think that this pandemic has helped exacerbate something that has been around for quite some time. And I know you spoke about it in one of your intros this week also, which is the construct that our learners want to have content available anytime, any place, and that we've created a whole lot more robust focus area on online asynchronous delivery. And I think that that is great in so many ways. And clearly that's where we should be continuing to drive. However, I think that in the pandemic, certainly, and in the shift of advent of from classroom to the online world, we lost part of the emphasis on the experiences that actually help people really make their knowledge actionable and usable. And so this is probably a little bit more for workplace learning styles, but I think that we have inappropriately not allowed our experts and our subject matter experts to be what they are, which are the people who have these rich experiences that the students don't have, and to allow them to be the bridge to have those experiences. And that we haven't done a good enough job at getting experiential learning into all of our content so that people have this rich and robust set of things to build upon as they continue their learning journeys.
And I think that's certainly true, and I think it was true before the pandemic, and is probably just more true as you pointed out since the pandemic. And it's a challenge. I mean, people grow up kind of with it's not a preconceived notion, but they grow up with a certain notion of what education is as they experience it, and kind of take that and translate that to the workplace as well. So we are trying to reimagine what education can be, but workplace learning is sort of in some ways, even less suited to some of those models, right? There's so much memorizing and testing, which is almost completely inapplicable to a lot of what you do in the workplace. And yet it's still considered, well, this is what education is. And the way that we see technology used has continued to often be supporting that, right? Like it's easier to track. It's easier to track what people do. It's easier to track their quiz scores. And none of that helps them be better at the job. And none of that helps them feel valued and respected as employees and as people. And that's kind of the one of the I don't know if it's even a side effect, it's really a major effect, I think, of all this in terms of, how people react to the experiences that they have, or whether they're good or bad ones. So, all right. So on more on the higher education side or workplace to the degree.
I was going to jump in
Yes,
terms
please.
of this idea of what we want higher education to be. I mean, you were saying that workplace education is seen as a model of following the model of what how higher education is seen, but I think we need to rethink higher education at that point. And you ask about weaknesses, but for me, the prior question is, what do we want higher education to achieve? And then we can see ways in which it's falling short. And so I kind of summarize my vision anyway, that I think I'd like to see higher education preparing people for the kind of future that we want to see, the kind of future that we hope they will create. And so there are a few aspects for me of that, of what that would involve. One is a breadth of understanding, so people can be effective participants in all aspects of society, not just in their job, but as citizens and making everyday decisions and so on. And I think a weakness in contemporary higher education are silos. You study science, you study philosophy, you study this, and you don't study anything else. Or maybe you have to do one general education requirement, but you lack that breadth of understanding, and there's not enough emphasis on also connections and interdisciplinarity. So I think that's one weakness. I think we also want to develop people in higher education who have specialized understandings in some areas so that they can contribute professionally and otherwise. And I think there the weakness is similar to what Alicia was alluding to, that is this kind of information overload, and you were also alluding to that rather, I think we're not teaching them how to understand the discipline, understand how it works, understand its methods, and how to make judgments in the area so that they can, if they're learning science, they actually can make scientific judgments that are required in everyday life as well. And the one I would emphasize particularly is that we want to develop people who are critical thinkers, who are inquirers, who don't want to just accept things the way they are, who don't just accept what they hear, etc., but want to find out and have the tools to inquire, know how to go about that, and are inclined to do that. And there, I think that's an area that really needs to be developed in higher education. I don't think we're generally doing a very good job at providing students with the resources for being inquirers, for evaluating information, for coming to judgments in different areas. And finally, one more, I think we want to develop people who can think collaboratively, not just work together, but think collaboratively, that is share ideas, critique, come up with better ideas together. So that's, and I don't think I may think our emphasis has been too much on individuals and individual learning and not enough on this kind of group collaborative thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like if anything in the US, the sense that I have is that the competitive nature grows over time, and people are starting to plan for where they're going to go to college when they're some ridiculously young age. And number one, you can't experiment and feel free to fail and try things and be creative and find yourself and all that stuff very easily if you're thinking about what college you're going to get into when you're like 7. But also, as you pointed out, it's not it's not a collaborative world, right? I mean, I grew up in sort of a lucky world. I went to a very progressive elementary school and experienced a lot of the things that we kind of I think want to suggest should be more widespread. And it was not at all a competitive environment. You grew, you didn't even consider that, right? You had your interests, your friends had their interests. We were not graded. I mean, you were evaluated. There was no question. I mean, they would meet with your parents and they would write, they'd write books about you basically. But, they evaluated you, but it was very, it was constructive, and it was the entire ethos of the school was that it was a very collaborative culture. So I was able to experience that for one period of time, and then, experienced kind of in a shocking way when when I got to my early teenage years, what it was like to be in an entirely different kind of environment. So I've seen it from both sides. So great, thanks for that. Antonella, of course,
Yeah,
lots more to say.
What's more to say? First of all, I would spend hours listening to Alicia and Sharon. Sharon is the best known expert in the field of critical thinking development. So to me, she's a living reference. But yes, we really need to understand what we want from higher education, and what also the actual labor market needs. So something that came out also from the session I was sharing today, but over the conference, I think in different ways, is that there are some keywords that that can summarize, let's say, the new need that comes out of everything that happened over this last year and a half. And that key word is discussion, cooperation, sharing of different point of views in order to understand which are actually the needs, and according to those needs, organize a new way of teaching and learning. Another reflection that we made over these last days at the conference is related to the fact that we all lived an experience where we lived an extension of time in a limited actual time, because over 1 year and a half we have been I don't have the word in English, but we have been shot in 20 years time, I think, because we we had to face change in such a small amount of time. We were forced to this change. Maybe this change was already needed. I mean, was there, and we had just to reach certain goals over a longer time. But having been compelled to this fast change, we also need to develop different kind of skills. And to develop different kind of skills, of course, we need to redesign. And as Sharon was saying, rethink higher education. And that's our, our engagement as educators, as in particular. As also Alicia was writing in the chat, with a new way of interpreting and applying the information. And to do that, we need to be critical thinkers. There's no way out.
No, absolutely. And one of the other points that Sharon mentioned was the idea of being prepared for society, which I think is absolutely critical. Right? We're preparing people for life and living in society. It's not just for work. And more and more these days, you need to be able to think critically in order to make any kind of appropriate life decisions, everything from where to live to who to vote for. And you have to really understand how to think through information, how to decide what's real and what's not, who to believe, who not to believe. It's a complicated world out there, especially if you're new to it and trying to think through it. So there's really a lot there. If we're looking to prepare people to really be ready to live in the world, as a citizen of the world and in a society with other people, all of these elements, collaboration, critical thinking, and sort of this, idea of preparing yourself for life and not just, and not just for work. So moving sort of a step from, the gaps and weaknesses that we see, can we talk a little bit about what our visions might be of what learning could look like, or maybe should look like, say maybe 5 years from now? So, we've, 1 year, hard. I'm always pushing for change a little bit faster, right? I know, David Kelly said in his keynote the other day, people ask him what's workplace learning gonna look like 3 years from now, and his answer is pretty much, what does it look like today? Because companies are slow to change. And that's true, but that, we are in a different, rest of the world is changing a lot faster. And it's really difficult for things to stay that way. And I get why it is. I consult to companies and I see the masses of, content that they don't want to part with, and just the sort of overall amount of stuff that it's really hard to change quickly. But we really need to figure out ways to change more quickly. So if you had an ideal world, at least, 5 years from now, what would people be doing in higher education, workplace learning? How would that look compared to what it looks like today? Anybody wants to jump in first on this one?
Sure. I would like to see an inquiry-based curriculum. That is a curriculum based around problems, issues, challenges, and not just courses. Maybe even instead of courses, certainly not just courses, or even in the courses. And I think about the kind of problem-based learning in some medical schools where they're no longer inundating the students with tons of information to memorize, but they have diagnostic problems and they work in groups and they acquire the information that they need to solve them. And I think that's a wonderful model of the education based around a real issue or a problem that requires making a judgment, that requires evaluating information, and that's collaborative and is they work in groups to solve that. And I think also some challenges can be interdisciplinary. So perhaps in a first year, having students work on problems that I think of something like maybe should we eat meat, which would involve looking at it from a health point of view, an economic point of view, an environmental point of view, moral point of view, so that they can see the interconnectivity. So those are some of my hopes. Dreams.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that came through in the comments they were kind of getting to as well was the idea that critical thinking and collaboration really are themes. So you're not necessarily, you may have courses or curriculum that's specifically helping you get better at critical thinking, but really that's built into everything, right? I mean, that's the kinds of experience we want, kinds of experiences that we want people to have. All of them would require critical thinking, decision making, often collaborative work, right? And that can be true of really any content area, right? Like, I mean, in the workplace learning world, I mean, I've been involved in a lot of customer service simulations, right? So for retail, right? So here's a job that's an entry level job, right? Where you need to learn how to, handle customers correctly, say the right things that are polite, understand when to bend policy, not when to stick with policy, understand what the policies actually are. And those things are still often taught by, you read the policy book, you maybe get a few pieces of advice on how to deal with customers, and that's it. And if that doesn't really make you very good at customer service. Okay, passing a test on those things doesn't make you good at customer service, even though it's arguably not an incredibly difficult role. It's a role that's best learned by doing, and by making decisions and by being put in positions where, okay, here's a customer in front of me, even if it's just in video, what do I do? They're 31 days past, they bought this thing 31 days ago, and our policy says that 30 days is the end of the returns. Do I let them return it? What do I do? They're yelling at me. How do I respond? What are the right words to say? And everything involves decision making and judgment, like any job that you do, and particularly every job now, because if there are jobs that don't involve judgment, they're generally automated at this point, or they're going to be automated really, really soon. And anyway, but yeah, all the way through from, I would argue from elementary school, childhood, all the way through, critical thinking and collaboration among others certainly belong at the root of that. So, all right, so I want to hear other people's visions for what things might look like.
Another aspect that I would stress is that, of course, we need to teach critical thinking, to change the curricula. And actually, Sharon knows well about a project, a European project that we have been carrying out. It ended just a couple of years ago. And within this European consortium, we worked on the possibility to change different curricula in different subjects to foresee critical thinking, teaching and learning. Another aspect that I think is important to stress is related to the use of cultural heritage in a very transversal way to support critical thinking, to support this kind of inquiry-based learning, because cultural heritage and let's say museum objects meant in a very wide sense can really support the development of certain cross-sectional skills. They are really interdisciplinary. So teaching and learning through cultural museum objects, cultural heritage objects can really represent in themselves the multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary dimension of teaching and learning that really support critical thinking and cross-sectional skills. This has been proved through different many different researches and many different evidences. So the possibility also to restart a new, a true renaissance. At that time, during Leonardo's time or Michelangelo's time, science and humanities were one thing, where the search for knowledge and development and growth and innovation, that was a true revolutionary time, and we need now really to regain this matching of humanities and and science, of course, to have innovation. But that is reached only through the combination of critical thinking and creativity, in my view, basing everything on the worthiness of working with cultural heritage, because cultural heritage represent the steps that humanity reached. It's our memory, as human beings, that is there, and which collects our possibility of renew and restart.
Wow, I love that, Antonella. That's amazing. I honestly have never really thought about cultural heritage that way. And so I've already learned so much today. Like, I'm just going to hang up and go now. So thank you guys for this session. No, I'm kidding. But, to pile on to what you and Sharon both iterated, I think that you both had some elements in there that are so interesting from the perspective that I take, because I think I shared the way I frame the world and how I've sort of come to this body of science earlier this week, but it is from the construct of how humans learn. And because I'm workforce focused in my job, but certainly not in my area of interest, I think that there are so many things that we could be doing that are incredibly interesting. I think that the way we assess knowledge is one of the first things. And I think Antonella or Sharon, you mentioned it, the ability to recognize something. Actually, I think it was you, David, as opposed to generate a statement on your own. The ability to pick a multiple choice in the way that we've been taught and assessed traditionally really doesn't allow us to show the latitude of thought that an individual really holds. And I think that that is truly based on who we are and our internal collective experiences and how we've arrived. And so this cultural heritage opens a huge new door for me, because I've often thought about the diversity of thought and how that relates to learning and user-centered design, and how frequently that isn't well recognized. And so for the our viewers here, our listeners, our learners, if you will, I don't know if you guys remember when it was a new technology that when you went to a public restroom and you put your hands under the sink, that the water would come on, right? Like, huge user-centered design, focused, great user experience, but they only used white people. So when I put my hands under, it wouldn't go, right? And so I always use that example of how important it is as we're creating learning and as we start to mirror what it is that we're going to see in the workplace, which is incredibly advanced levels, maybe not 5 years, 10 years, certainly, just huge gains in the diversity of people, but also in the diversity of thought. And so as much as that is an effect of what color we happen to be, as a huge melting pot, we're all becoming different colors, and the colors are really starting to blur. And it's not so much about diversity. We have a diversity and inclusion board, and it seems obvious, but then we don't include the right people when we design these things. We don't respect other people's inherent knowledge and where they've come from and how they come to us when we think about how do we teach something that is going to be applied in so many different facets, using critical thinking as a construct, but not including the amazing amount of experience that people bring to these problems and how they could reach dramatically different solutions, and how that could be incredibly beneficial to us if we really got back to that renaissance of knowledge exploration and trying to figure out what it was and how powerful that really is. Okay, off the soapbox. So in other words, yes.
Absolutely. And I mean, related to that, and then we got a couple of questions coming in already. Related to that, I think, is the idea of how we can best use technology in what we do, right? Because there's still the predominant use of technology is still, kind of what we're doing now, which is certainly, look, it's wonderful to be able to have this discussions and not have to all be in the same place, which was impractical and, can't happen that frequently and all those things. So that's all a great thing, but that's not all there is, right? So, imagine you want to learn about government and you put people in a situation where they're in this really cool simulation where they each play a different role, and maybe it's a collaborative world and they each play a role, the people in the class play a role, and that's the focal point for discussions, and that can then bring about further discussions. Or maybe they play it on their own and they can switch around and see what happens when they're, the governor or the mayor, or whether they're, a lower level employee or just a general citizen, and see how things affect them. There are all sorts of different types of technology that we can build that put people in the right experience, in the right situations experientially. And a lot of us, of course, have a background in that. And, you still don't see that necessarily as, when I see visions of future education, or if I read something else, you necessarily see it cast that way. At least I haven't all that often. And to me, that's going to be an important point as well, where, the thing that Deb talked about in, museum experiences, getting back to Antonella's point there in her keynote, I mean, those are experiences that we could have, we want that level of experience everywhere, right? And people get online experiences in the rest of their lives. They just don't get good online experiences in school necessarily. So there's so much there. So we are getting questions. So let me ask one of the questions that came in. Strangely for me, it does not say who it's from, so I apologize for that. What are our thoughts on push versus pull training? So meaning, do we push critical thinking and collaborative skills to students, or do we lead them to become interesting? And so people will actually pull these to themselves and want to go out and seek them out. So that's a question for the audience.
In front of the human reference, the living reference on critical thinking, I'm going to go first because I know I can't top that. Not that I want to.
Yeah, but, please.
But for me, I think that it's not about pushing or pulling in that construct. And I did answer Bruce's question in the chat. But for me, it's about making critical thinking in the fabric of everything that we teach, of not having a critical thinking course that you have to go and take, and when you come out, you're expected to be critical thinkers, of really embedding that into every single thing that we do and making it a reflex, making it a habit, as opposed to making it something that now I have to think, did I apply critical thinking to this? I think it's so important that it has to be ingrained in everything. And hopefully I made you proud, Sharon, as a fledgling critical thinker.
Exactly. I absolutely agree.
There we go. Nothing more to be said. Yeah, no, it's one of the side effects, I think, of the kind of things we're talking about. There's a view that people often have of traditional education as that it's a chore. It's something you have to get through, right? Like, it's not the fun part of your day. It's what you do to get to the fun part of your day, right? And, you got to go to school. You've got to take your tests. That's what you have to do. And there's no reason it should be like that, right? Like, I mean, I really, believe at my core that people inherently like to learn in the right senses of learning. And, that was the experience I was lucky enough to have. And I know how lucky I was to have at a young age when I had that elementary school. Like, we didn't go to school and we didn't have tests. You went and you worked on interesting projects with interesting people, and you talked about them, and you had good guidance, and you were supported, and you were challenged. It wasn't like you just did what they didn't turn the room over to a bunch of 10-year-olds and say, do what you want. But, but that you didn't, from that experience, you didn't come out thinking, sure, there are days you didn't want to go to school, you just want to go play basketball or whatever, but you didn't come on a day-to-day basis feeling this is a chore, and that learning is unfun and something that you do because you have to, and life is fun and the part you do when you're not learning. They should be integrated. And I think all of us who've ended up in this field have had experiences or, natural instincts or both that lead us to feel that, of course, learning is fun. Naturally, it is. But the experiences that people have don't go that way. And that's kind of what we're getting to. So somebody's asked me, what school is this? This is so different than my experience.
Yeah,
No,
in fact, that's what I was
very aware of how unique it was.
As well.
It still exists. It's a progressive elementary school in the Washington, D.C. area called Green Acre School. It's in Rockville, Maryland, which is outside of Washington, D.C. I'm still in touch with them regularly. It's still it was based on progressive learning theories, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And, I think has a lot to do with sort of what I got interested in doing. So I can't credit them enough, but I also understand that was a really lucky thing to be able to do at that age, and that most people don't, for one reason or another, have access to that. And had I lived somewhere else, when we moved, I didn't have access to it anymore, right? And it was a big change. So it was just a combination of factors that got me there. And, but what I'm hoping we can do, especially with the use of technology, is be able to build more experiences that scale up better, right? Because that is not an experience that scales up financially at this point. You just need too many good teachers, too many, you needed small classes, things are just unaffordable at any kind of large scale. But a cool government simulation is not unaffordable at a large scale necessarily, right? If you build it and it can apply to millions of people and they can all use it differently, you're certainly going to need human participation, but you don't need, maybe you're taking something that would have required 40 hours of a teacher's time to really do it right and turn it into something that takes 5 hours of a teacher's time to do it right. I mean, that's, there are lots of different things that we have to think about, but that's one of the ways I see taking technology and really changing the way that, that education is. But yeah, there's so much about, creating a world that people are, comfortable with and comfortable in and enjoy. And I think that's where we're trying to go with all of this, because it does seem, it seems very wrong societally, right? That people think that learning is a chore and not fun, right? That's what, that's what they have to. But it's not an uncommon opinion that people have at, older ages than we like to think, really. I think we've, followed some of the things in the news over the past several years. So I'll leave that at that.
I can add something to
Please.
I mean, just an episode that I'd like to share with all of you, and in relation to the possibility to support experiences in teaching and learning and support the pleasure of certain experiences. Yesterday, we had a session, a teaching and learning session within a research project, which is based on the idea of inclusion and of supporting inclusion through the development of new and the support of new or, let's say, non-conventional ways of teaching and learning. So this project is addressed to young people with different kind of cognitive disabilities, and we went to a museum, Galleria Nazionale di Arte Moderna, which is one of the biggest museums in Rome, and of course, we had to design this activity previously. We had to select certain works of art to work with these young groups. We had to work with the museum employees, of course, with museum educators, with museum experts in order to choose certain work of art that were possible to be touched. So we organized these sessions with these secondary school students. They are attending a school which is based in the outskirts of Rome, so not in the city center. They, as I said, have different cognitive problems, and they don't study history of art at all. So they were, for the first time, at the museum. We developed different activities based on object-based learning, of inquiry-based learning. We work with them trying to establish a relation with the work of art, and they really showed such an engagement. We, of course, made them work, and we also measured their well-being levels through these two well-being toolkits that have been developed by the University College of London, where in particular Ellen Chatterjee, which is a partner within our with our institution, she worked, and their group worked on the development of these so-called umbrellas well-being measurement toolkit. And what I can tell you is that they were so much engaged. They were so taken by the possibility to touch certain objects, to establish a physical relationship with the objects within the museum, that they told me while leaving, listen, may we come back to this place? Is it possible to come back for free to this place? You know, just for those questions, for that true involvement, passion that we actually inspired in those secondary school students, it was worth having this activity. But what I want to say is that not only we supported inquiry-based learning, we supported their learning, but we supported their relation with their identity, you know, which is represented by the works of art of the artists that you know, were inspired by a situation linked to human emotions and growth. So as you said, that's why cultural heritage can be really you know, a solution to different kind of educational problems.
There's a anecdote I'd like to tell too, which is a little different, but I think picks up some of the same themes and some of the themes that David, that you were raising about engagement and about how we start. And one of the educators I've worked with is she's a kindergarten teacher, so she teaches little ones in a very disadvantaged area, very disadvantaged area, and she has basically an inquiry-based curriculum in kindergarten. Her kids wanted to have a class pet. She said, okay, we're going to do an inquiry about pets. And the kids, with help and guidance, did research to find out about different animals that they were thinking of and their characteristics. And they evaluated, they made charts, pro and con, you know, what are the advantages or different advantages of different pets, and what is the school board policy about pets, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually they came to a collective decision about what pet to have. And she was really surprised and delighted that there were no tears by the kids who pet wasn't chosen, because they've all been part of this decision-making process. And they had to figure out how to raise money, and they were dealing with finances and counting money. They made a presentation to the school board. I mean, and these kids were having fun. They were so engaged and they were learning so much. And I think, well, you know, these are kids who, if they, you know, can go on like this, could create the future that I'd like to see. So it's possible, and she's a model, and so other teachers are picking up on her because they can see that it works. And so I think that kind of ground up change, maybe that's how it can happen too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's something sort of in that you know, goes along with the, I guess, sort of the philosophical change, right? Which is, so much now is still, there's a teacher and there are students, and there's an implicit power dynamic in that, right? The teacher knows, the students don't. The teacher will tell, the students will learn. And none of that is necessarily right. Even at a young age, it's not necessarily right. Like, I mean, the teacher certainly has more experience, knows a lot of things you don't know when you're younger, but they don't know everything. And you need to learn things for yourself by experimenting, by doing the way that you're discussing. You put people in this situation where they can learn to do things, and they have much more control of the experience. They feel more respected. They enjoy the experience, on and on and on. And, you know, there is something to, you know, the discussions that you often see, I think, in the general public are about how can we improve teaching, and they're not about how can we improve learning. And I think it's come up in a couple of talks this week, and those are not the same thing. And, you know, the dynamic, I think the power dynamic does matter too. Right? You see that in the corporate world too. There's a corporate hierarchy, and then you go in and you have a trainer. So, you know, where am I in all this, right? I'm just trying to get by, because that's the only position. You're already set up to be in that position, right? You're not set up to feel my opinions are valued. I can experiment. I have things to contribute. I have new ways of doing things. I want to go off on my own and sort of explore this job the way that I want. You can do that, but it takes a lot more to do that when you're already in a position where it's sort of, you know, structured so that that's not expected of you. So following on this really quick, Bruce had brought up a question I just want to let go. For the reimagined future of learning, what are the base skills that we should make part of the curriculum? And I think, to me, I'd kind of treat those as themes rather than necessarily courses, but skills that would underlie things. So he's got scientific method, critical thinking, working as part of a group, inquisitiveness are the four he's named that we've, I think, discussed so far. What else would we put in there? Certainly I would put in sort of, an appreciation for experimentation and creativity, and feeling the freedom to do that would probably be one. What else might we add to this group?
So for me, I happened to see this in the chat a few minutes ago and had to resist the urge to answer it. So thank you, Bruce, for asking this question. But this ties back to exactly what you just evoked, David, which is, and for me, it's social responsibility, but from a very different perspective. I think we do a pretty bad job of helping our employees, students, all of those things, understand how important their role in the world is, and how being good stewards of this world and of their own learning and of other people is incredibly important. And so for workplace learning, it's very hard for, sometimes I have accountants and, within acquisition, because we're DoD acquisition, they might get this crazy requirement, 3 months too late in this big, huge stack of paperwork that now we want to add corrosive coating to this chain that wasn't part of the original requirement. And it's really easy to say, yeah, no, there's no way at this point. We'd have to go back 3 steps to move forward 1. It's too big of a lift to add corrosive coating to the chain that you want, right? And I feel like if we told that accountant sitting in isolation in this cube, in this farm of cubes in a basement somewhere, probably in that 5-sided building just north of us, that chain was going to be used for extracting hostages in wartime situations, they would think very differently about going through the motions and standing up for the requirement to get corrosive coating on a chain. All you need is one of those to break. And we don't often get to pull the thread of how our own individual contributions contribute to a collective. And I think so there's social responsibility and workplace responsibility. And at the pedagogical level for younger students, I think social responsibility is sort of that, what we want to evoke so that they understand the importance of this.
Absolutely. Other comments and other things that we might want to include in, sort of the underlying key skills and key themes in, in a reimagined educational world. Anything else we want to add at this point? We can certainly keep that going as we move on. And we have a comment. Again, for some reason, tell me who it is. The comment says that they've recently grown a deep respect for those who are really good at making value propositions. And comment says, I teach this to my grad students, but maybe there's a larger application for this kind of skill.
That's
a good point.
Deborah
Yeah.
Howes. That's Deborah Howes.
Deb? Okay, I don't know why it doesn't say Deb to me. Okay,
Yeah.
so apparently it says Deb to everybody else. For me, it's blank. I apologize, Deb. It's good to see you, and I'm sorry. Great. No, Deb, I think that's certainly a big point. I mean, I know I see that in sort of almost any kind of business situation I end up in where it's at least within that realm, it's a challenge. You can talk to somebody about what they're doing, and it's hard to understand, even to make good buying decisions about what's worth it, and hard sometimes to feel like you're getting a solid explanation. Okay, well, here's an area that I'm not familiar with. Okay, so here's, we do a lot of video shoots. Here's something we're working on with the video team, and we're using a subcontract video crew, and we've done a lot of these before, but this is something, okay, what are the pros and cons of, what are we going to get out of shooting it in, 4K versus 1080p? What are we going to, okay. And so is it worth it? The question is it worth it? Is a hard question to answer what's the value proposition? And that doesn't seem to be a concept that you encounter until you get to a certain age in most cases. I think you're absolutely right about that. And it seems to apply to almost everything, even in terms of, the sort of, how can I say this? The sort of, I hesitate to use this term. I think that even applies to your own personal branding. And you're going to see why I hesitate to use this term, because I don't really like the term personal branding, right? I don't like that that's the way the world has become. And it certainly has become here in the US, right? That you're expected to have a personal brand, right? You can't just be, you have to have a brand. But in terms of being able to find the right jobs for you and to find the right, situations to work in and all of that, and even within an organization, there is something to that, right? And so you need to be able to learn how to appropriately and comfortably and ethically position yourself in a way that makes it clear sort of, what you're providing. And so there's something to that as well, I think. So curious to hear other people's thoughts about this one.
I mean, I think
Now that I've used the term personal branding.
Whenever we ask a question, what should we do in any context, whether it's in the work context, should we do X, Y, Z? Should we automate this? Should we eat meat? Should we require vaccine passports? Should we vote for somebody? I mean, once you use the should we, there's a value judgment in there. You can't answer those questions just with facts. I mean, facts are really important, but they don't get you all the way there. There's always some value judgment, and it's important to take that into account that, should we automate this? Well, you say, well, it'll save X, save money or whatever, but it may involve laying off staff, laying off workers. Okay, should we do that? I mean, you can't ignore that question. Now, how you answer that is not easy, and philosophers have been talking about that for a long time. But I think we can go a lot farther in answering those questions through deliberation than we usually do, and not just say, well, that's your value, it's my value, and that actually you can go farther and ask for reasons of why do you think that, and what do you think the consequences would be. And I think we can get closer together, at least on some of these issues, than we tend to think by just accepting, well, everyone has a different value and opinion, and so we can't say anything else about it.
Yeah, and that's a critical point. I think Deb, I assume it's Deb, still mentions that a good value proposition takes many perspectives into account. I think it goes along very much with what you're saying, and that, and even more so that, people do more and more, it seems, in certain, certain contexts today, have a particular, almost a position that's hard to move off of, right? And so to be able to take a step back and say, people value certain things for certain reasons. They may be different from mine, but there are reasons behind it. Let's try to understand what it can be and what we can do with it is a challenge, but it's, it opens up a lot of discussion. And if you can have that particularly at younger ages, we'll be better off. So there's sort of the short-term and long-term approaches in this, right? So there's what can you do short-term and long-term. So, all right, time is running quickly. I'm going to try to move to the Q&A questions. So thank you for that, Alicia. So we have questions in the Q&A as well as the chat. See, Zoom, Zoom has two places. So what are we going to do? So apologize for being a little slow on this one. First question is, how do we ensure we're giving enough opportunities to a learner for building the skills required for critical thinking? So how do we ensure we're giving enough opportunities to a learner to build the skills that are required for critical thinking? We want to.
I think that Sharon is the best one.
No, go.
No. I was saying that Sharon can answer that one because I experience it with her. So.
I think we can't think of it as an extra. I mean, as David said before, it's not just, well, you do everything the same way and then you have a critical thinking course. It's got to be part of the way we learn everything and approach all learning. So and so students should be doing it all the time.
And a follow-on question to that, so which is, as we're moving towards Society 5.0, this is another question from the Q&A. As moving on towards Society 5.0, what can we do to further advance the technology adaptability of learners across all age groups, especially baby boomers? So what can you do? I guess especially for the older learners to make sure that they, they continue to be part of what we're doing.
That's a crucial point, I think. And in my view, the most important thing is to use technology in a critical way. So it's not technology for technology. We need to understand which is the right, not right actually, the most consistent technology that we can use according to our objectives. So the first thing is have a good well thought design, and then use technology consequently. So of course we cannot it's also difficult to talk about e-learning anymore because we mobiles or different kind of devices are part of our life. They are part of our body in a way. So we need to use them. They are part of our everyday life, but we need also to understand what and when using technology. From now on, I would say that from the pandemic advent, we learned a lot. I think, as I was saying before, in a very short time, we had the opportunity to learn a lot about the use of technology. There are some aspects that I think are really useful. We learned that we can do many things without saving important issues for the environment, for our personal energy. We learned that we can live basically wherever we please, and being active, and even more active, as we were saying before. So there are different aspects that with this pandemic can be used as important, but one of the most important findings is that we need to reflect. We need to have to think about what we are doing, about the technology we use. As Sharon was saying at the very beginning, we don't want future learners who just accept what would come. They need to doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does change we need to create a structure and a power dynamic that allows people to feel comfortable doing that. Right. I think that's part of what we're trying to do. Other comments on that? We're going to get close to somehow the hour goes by faster than you can imagine.
Shelby chooses to live in Rome. Yes, we are looking forward to your travel to Rome, and to welcome you to Rome. Actually, Sharon also has a place in Italy. Unfortunately, I hope. Are you coming to Italy soon, Sharon?
I hope.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
We need to get a place in Rome.
And you too, Alicia.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I love Rome.
We're waiting for you to come.
I've got the self-application for the TLIC Center open on my computer right now.
Wonderful, wonderful. So if you're interested, we would like to welcome you on board.
Wonderful. Well, in just the minute or so that we have left, as yes, everybody is very ready to just move this whole show to Rome and do it right now. So we're
let's all go to American Academy. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think everyone's in on this one, so no one's saying no to Rome. So as we just have a minute or so to wrap up, if we wanted to look at words to leave people with, what are a couple things that we think are particularly critical for people to think about, maybe even in the near term? We've kind of talked a little bit about the future. So what are a couple things that people should just kind of maybe look to try to do in the short term to take a step closer toward the ideal vision that we have? So, maybe just take a minute and let people think for a second, since that kind of came unexpectedly, but this may be a nice way to use the last couple of minutes we have and just sort of give people a couple of your thoughts on what we can do in the short term to try to bring about maybe some nearer term change and take a step toward what we imagine the future to be.
If I can start, I can
Please.
tell you, that in my view, a first change that is really needed is related to assessment. procedures or ways of assessing students' learning, because if we need to rethink higher education and the workplace, we need also to rethink assessment procedures. We need to work on that, because otherwise we miss such an opportunity to change and to introduce critical thinking, to support critical thinking. Because as we were saying, we have plenty of information available everywhere. So it's not a matter of teaching certain concepts, certain knowledge. It's a matter of supporting, as Alicia was saying, interpreting and the interpreting skills, argumentation skills, judgment skills. And so the way we carry out assessment is absolutely inconsistent with what is the need that we need to face, that we have to face. So I think that our thought should go to that area, but I don't want to steal more time.
Okay, no, that's great. No, that's a huge point. I mean, I think that comes down from, even beyond the assessments within a school, right? I mean, people from the beginning, certainly in the US, I mentioned they're trying to get to, you're planning on getting into college from a young age. You're doing the things they're going to get you into the college that you want to go to from a young age, which means, there's now finally a movement away from standardized tests, but it really was a lot of trying to qualify and trying to pass the right tests. And that's the goal. And when that's the goal, that's where the effort's going to go to, rather than the things that are of more value. So I think that's a huge point. Who wants to go next? That's the final wrap up.
I think what inquiry, I think, is crucial. And I think, obviously, systemic change is what we should be aiming for, changing structures. But also, I think tomorrow, an instructor can make changes by thinking about their curriculum and their pedagogy differently, instead of a massive information to be learned, and thinking about how can I organize this around an inquiry question. I mean, that little change is a big change, and people could do that tomorrow. How do I have students inquire, and what tools do I need to help them with in order to do that?
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, and for me, it's really about learning the same way we work, teaching the way people learn, and assessment that matters and is performance focused. And so I think we've touched on all of the big things, and this has just been lovely. So many great comments.
Yeah, this has really been something. Thank you so much to all of our panelists and to everybody for contributing. This is just such an enjoyable past hour, and a little more
for hours.
We really could.
Absolutely.
We could do hours this.
Yeah, it was really great fun to be there with all of you. Looking forward to meeting all of you in person, because there are some things that still need to be done in person.
No. Well, now we're obviously all coming to Rome. I think we've already established that. So you're going to see us all sooner than you think. It seems. I think everybody on this call is coming in. So
looking forward to it.
Yes. Well, so are we. Well, it was great talking to all of you. So thank you so much. I'm going to stay on because actually the next talk is my own little brief talk before 3 o'clock. So I'm going to stay on and share some slides and go through a little bit of a future vision of some demos. And you're all welcome to please stay and participate. Really couldn't have enjoyed this any more than I did. So thanks again to everybody, and we'll move on to my next talk. Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao, a presto.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.